Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to host this incredible panel with these two remarkable women. We are women climate warriors, and we come at this issue of climate change, which is the most important issue of our time. We come at this from different vantage points and experiences, and this is going to be a broad-reaching conversation about various approaches to addressing climate change and recognizing that women are at the forefront and really quite centered in this movement. So with that, I'll begin with introductions. I'm Rachel Payne. I am currently Managing Director and Head of Innovation and Technology at Full Cycle Climate Partners. We are a growth equity fund. We invest in companies and their associated infrastructure projects that are proven to be effective and scalable for addressing the climate crisis. We are a global fund, and we look for 6-continent solutions. So we're really looking to help scale solutions that can be deployed today and have a high degree of efficacy, which we measure in terms of carbon return on investment. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ellie Cohen. Welcome, Ellie.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Thanks for including me today, and welcome to everybody who is joining us now. My name's Ellie Cohen. I'm CEO of the Climate Center, which is based in California. We are a climate and energy policy nonprofit that works to rapidly reduce greenhouse gases at scale. And our priority right now is focused on California state policy to accelerate climate timelines from 2045 to 2030 because 2045 is too late. Would you like me to spend a little more time on my background, Rachel, or is that a good intro?
Perhaps you could just give a little bit of background on the origin of the Climate Center, and I think more about you would be great too. We have enough time, so feel free to do that.
Sure. So the Climate Center was founded in 2001 by Anne Hancock, who is still part of our leadership team as our chief strategist. In the early years, it was focused on county-level efforts in Sonoma County, California. It was the first county in the United States to enact specific greenhouse gas reduction measures in every city and the county itself, and was recognized nationally. Building on that, the Climate Center played a lead role in the growth of what we call community choice energy, which is locally managed electricity as opposed to investor-owned utilities. And these community choice energies become CCAs, community choice aggregation, they're called. There was one founded in 2010, the second one in 2014. Today, there are 24 CCAs in California that serve 11 million people with 88% greenhouse gas free electricity. It's a great example of our mission, speed and scale greenhouse gas reduction. And I'm very proud to be a part of it and to take it to this next level, focusing on the state. Personally, I grew up in Baltimore on the East Coast of the United States. And I grew up in a family where social justice issues were very important. My parents took us to demonstrations, and we grew up in an area where the civil rights movement was a big priority for us and our family and in our neighborhood and in our community. And by 7th grade, I had this dream that I would bring the Russians and Americans together through our common love of nature. And when I applied to colleges, that's what I applied for, forestry and Russian. Eventually, I made my way out to California doing butterfly ecology studies and was accepted actually to University of California to get a PhD. And I realized that as much as I love nature and butterflies, that I should use my skills to make a difference on a bigger level. And my favorite area is that nexus between science and policy application. Before I came to the Climate Center, I was CEO of Point Blue Conservation Science that today has 160 scientists that work in partnership with federal and habitat and wildlife management agencies and works in 12 different countries. And it was there that I really began to see the serious impacts of climate change. I was very lucky to participate in the second Al Gore training for An Inconvenient Truth and really applied that to the conservation movement. But in the last couple of years during my tenure at Point Blue, I decided that I really wanted to work directly on policy, moving the needle on a big way on climate change. And I'm very thrilled to be part of moving forward what we call Climate Safe California, which I'll tell you more about later. Thank you.
you. Very comprehensive. Appreciate it, Ellie. Lauren, welcome.
Thank you. Ellie, you inspired me. I'm going to also kind of give some of my because really I feel like I joined the climate movement when I was in kindergarten, when I found out what landfills were. And I thought it was such an unimpressive solution for garbage, growing up in a family that composts and everything. And I've been involved my whole life. In college, I was on our student sustainability committee, and I worked for the Office of Sustainability, and went on to be an entrepreneur, or ecopreneur, as people like to say now, which I think is a fun term. And I'm also a strategist. So as a consultant strategist, I've worked on various projects. Was really lucky to be a part of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change's Paris Agreement public engagement campaign, which we were all so filled with hope, and it was very exciting. And helped shape Ford's electrification strategy for 2030, and finally founded a company of my own, a climate tech company called FerraZero, that builds software that enables zero waste systems and behaviors, principally making compost instead of food waste, and replacing disposable containers with reusables for takeaway in food and beverage. And the key for that to be successful has everything to do with data collection and data storytelling, measuring outcomes and impact so that people can see the impact of their choices, and that organizations can see the impact of different business practices. And once we measure that, we can put value on it. And it was this theory of change and this understanding that brought me to Dashboard, where I am director of partnerships. And Dashboard Earth is hopefully your new favorite app when we launch this summer. Right now we're in beta. But Dashboard Earth is a civic climate engagement platform designed to build local resilience through verified collective action. And that has two meanings for kind of two audiences that are working together through the Dashboard Earth platform. So for people, what it means is we deliver to you relevant opportunities for climate action in your neighborhood. So you get a snapshot of the health and sustainability of your neighborhood, the vulnerabilities, and it connects you immediately with actionable things to do. All of the helpers, all of the organizations, amazing organizations like Climate Center, for example, and you can join and participate. And we also connect you with incentives, and we're able to see the progress and how we're transforming the health and climate resilience of our neighborhood collectively. And then for organizations, we're able to connect organizations with people to participate in these efforts, as well as the insights of how we're doing. And that is very valuable. And we can talk more about the importance of data collection and data storytelling, but that's sort of a snapshot of who I am and what I'm working on. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you both. And now I'm inspired to share what sparked the climate activist in me. I remember when I was in elementary school and we were dealing with the ozone crisis, and my first science project was trying to create a model of the world with and without ozone. It's very complicated for an elementary school child, but I tried my best. I won, so that's cool. But also, it was the first time that we were able to see, for my generation, collective action that translated into policy making, with heads of state making a concerted effort to create new standards and requirements that actually change the world. And so it's a wonderful example of where collective individual action combined with leadership. This is leadership within the countries and the states, but also at a global level, where we have an example where concerted efforts and collective action can make a tremendous difference. And I know that we often point to that example as something that demonstrates that with the right policies in place and the right regulations to protect our environment, we can make a substantial difference. And so, Ellie, this brings us, of course, right back to you, what you're doing here in California. I also am in California, just for everyone's awareness. I was born, I'm a native Angelino, which who can say that? And my family has deep ties, both sides to California, many generations. And before I came to Full Cycle, I was working in a variety of different capacities on the issue of climate change. I also started an organization called the Tree Pledge, which is focused on urban reforestation and creating better community access to nature, and looking at how we build partnerships and how we coordinate across different types of organizations to drive more resources into vulnerable communities, which is, of course, especially important now in the era of COVID, where many of the communities, especially here in LA, are dealing with very high respiratory illness burden as a result of close proximity to highways and trucking routes and places that unfortunately do not have a lot of trees. And that lack of shade canopy has a direct correlation with negative health outcomes. Here in California, Ellie, you know this better than anyone. Unfortunately, tree canopy is linked to your level of affluence, and I don't believe, as a founder of Tree Pledge, that your wealth should determine whether or not you have access to nature. And so there are many, many things that we are trying to tackle. I think California is a wonderful state to be in because it poses both the most potential and the most challenge in its complexity. So, Ellie, first of all, what are you doing in California? How do you stay sane doing it? And what are some of the key initiatives that are really defining the Climate Center right now?
Thank you, Rachel. And thanks for sharing some of your personal background. I didn't know that, and that's very inspiring and critically needed. At the Climate Center, our focus now is what we call Climate Safe California. It's a campaign to accelerate climate policy timelines so we achieve net negative emissions, which means we are drawing down more carbon and more greenhouse gas emissions than we're putting out by 2030. Right now, our law in California is by 2045. And we know that that's too late. In fact, many of the countries around the world that are considered at the leading edge of climate change are following the prescription from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report from 2.5 years ago, which we call the 1.5C report, which many of you may know. The 1.5C report basically was requested from the UN in order to figure out what are the policies we need to put in place. Is it even possible to stay below 1.5C warming in the industrial era? And their conclusion was that we basically have to cut emissions in half by 2030, and we have to start drawdown of upwards of 1 trillion tons of warming pollutants we've already dumped into the atmosphere. And the goal there is to get to net zero emissions by 2050 globally. One of the problems with this is that since then, there's all kinds of new science that's showing that the climate situation has rapidly worsened globally. And we certainly experienced that here in California. Last fall and the end of the summer and the beginning of the fall, we had unprecedented wildfires with a 3-week smoke storm that sat over the state. We know something like 30 people died directly, and another, maybe as many as 3,000 people over 65 died during that 3-week period just from the extra particulate matter, that air pollution that was just hanging around for so long. And, on top of that, it's not just the smoke storms. We have a fair amount of oil production and refinement here in California. And of our 40 million people who live here, 7 million people live within 1 mile of oil and gas facilities, and they're exposed every single day of the year to toxins and pollutants. So here in California, a lot of people around the world think, oh, California is so incredible. They're at the cutting edge. We used to be, but we've really fallen seriously behind. We're behind the EU in our goals right now. We're behind the United Kingdom with conservative leader Boris Johnson. We're even behind states like Rhode Island in the United States. So we have a lot more to do to catch up. And we know that setting bold goals makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. Boy, those fires. When I looked at the map, we were burning from northern Mexico to Washington, and it was just one massive cloud of smoke. I had to be evacuated. So many of my friends had to be evacuated. And then we look at what happened with this massive weather event in Texas. And what is it that isn't resonating with people? Climate change is real. How do we get this message across? Lauren, what are you doing to engage people?
Well, that's exactly it. It's like we have to get the message across to people. And I think that there's more and more awareness that climate change is real, that it's happening. People are scared. People are seeing the evidence of it. But there's not a great understanding of what needs to be done. What can I do? You know, it often feels so big. It's this big thing that's happening. What do I do? And so what we're doing is we're breaking it down and bringing it literally close to home so that you can see what you can do that's relevant in your neighborhood. Christina Figueres said that adaptation is the stepchild of the climate movement. And I think that that's so on point because adaptation is really hard. There's no panacea. There's no one size fits all, ring to rule them all solution for climate change. And the ways to build resilience depend so much on a particular neighborhood, its geography, its socioeconomic factors, the history, the will of the people. So we have to have a system that is taking all of that into account and then is incentivizing the right things. And when I say right things, I mean the things that will actually be building resilience as opposed to perpetuating the old paradigm, the same problem. So what we're doing is we're using technology to deliver those personalized, localized, and incentivized actions that everybody can take so that it's relevant and making a difference in each neighborhood, but we're also showing the impact of that so that you can see that what you're doing is making a difference. And that's our theory of change of like, that's how we make sense of this crisis and of the transition and make it really like digestible, relevant, actionable for people, because we need everybody to be participating. But if we can't break it down and make it really personal, really make the invisible visible, make the unmeasured measured, then how are we going to be able to make inroads? And how are we going to be able to make sense and change perception, right? So that's really the core of what Dashboard Earth is doing. And what's supporting that is the ability to verify different actions in order to, as I said before, like actually measure to manage and make the invisible visible.
And it seems for both of you, the underlying element here is also educating people on what actions are important. In your case, Lauren, localizing them and personalizing them based on what people care about and what they're able to do. And in your case, Ellie, making them aware of these issues and giving them a clear call to action that can influence policy. How do you think about that link between education, awareness, and action?
I think that's a critical link. And in fact, most everything that we do at the Climate Center and that many organizations who work within the climate movement here in California, for example, ultimately it is a lot about education, not just of the general public. In the past few months, we at the Climate Center have met with 30 to 40 members of the state legislature, educating them on the latest science so that no one gets comfortable in sitting in that policy sphere of 2.5 years ago, which is outdated now. We need to light a fire under them and catalyze their action by educating them on the latest science and how quickly things are changing, which means we have to be bolder in our policy making. We also believe in our theory of change at the Climate Center that we need action at all levels of society, no question about it, and across every sector. But we believe that changing policy is the critical unlock that allows all these other things to happen, including allowing everybody to participate, whatever their socioeconomic background is. And so basically, we are mobilizing across all kinds of sectors, from local governments, environmental and justice groups, health leaders, labor, academics, and others, so we can empower state decision makers to have that courage, really, to adopt the bold policies that are needed, and then catalyze this innovation and channel market forces that really makes it possible for everybody to participate. A great example of that is with solar. Initially, if we didn't have some public investment in solar early on, we wouldn't be where we are today, where solar is the cheapest form of electricity globally. And so, again, we need participation across all levels of society. We need that education, but we also need that critical policy unlock.
So speaking as an investor, it's hard to make these long-term investments in climate critical infrastructure if you don't have a supporting policy environment. And if your policy environment is not just dynamic, but volatile, which we've had for the last several years. So much backtracking, lost ground that we fought so hard to make progress on. And here we are trying to make that up again. We know that at the federal level, we have a really strong belief in intersectionality and the importance of cross-cutting programs to incorporate climate into every agency. We also saw the importance of climate being recognized at the cabinet level, finally, for the first time, and having very strong leaders who have deep experience. Ellie, what do you think that means in terms of the ability for states to create big, bold policy initiatives, and also the ability to link into larger federal programs?
I think it's very exciting. I have to say, personally, I was a bit skeptical of what the new Biden administration would really do, but we've seen action, which is always stronger than words, over the past 6 or 8 weeks. And it's been unbelievable. And the latest is this new COVID relief fund of almost $2 trillion. And that will be enormous to give a shot in the arm to the economy, but doing it in a green way. And we expect, for example, in a state like California, that we'll get billions of new dollars infused into our economy. And now the challenge is to be sure that our decision makers in the state direct those funds in a way that keeps us on the path to accelerated climate action. I think it's a huge opportunity. But it's not just about federal funds. It is also about the regulatory environment. And at the Climate Center, we work on legislative as well as regulatory issues. And I say that because when we think about, Rachel, the investment side of this and the private sector and how we engage the private sector more, it means we need regulations that open up the doors for participation from the private sector, and at the same time, protect our most vulnerable populations and our environment. It's an interesting balance to make, but that's really what is needed.
And to stop protecting and fast tracking incumbent fossil fuel industry.
Yes.
I was looking at what's going on right now today in Kern County, California, where they're trying to write a blank check for 2,500 new oil wells to be drilled, and under a blank environmental impact assessment, a catch-all that doesn't go into any level of detail on impacts for local community. That's happening right here, right now in Kern County, California.
Correct. So Kern County, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lauren, please.
Oh, no,
Okay.
Go ahead. I was just
Yeah, I know. It's very frustrating. There was something like an 8-hour hearing yesterday by the County Board of Supervisors. Kern County, for those of you outside of California, is in the southernmost part of the Central Valley, and it is the center of oil production in California. And it is also one of the places where we have some of the most low-income communities, where you have the highest rates of asthma and other diseases related to the oil production. And so the challenge for us is, so you have 5 elected officials that come from this community and these communities that are there, but there is a huge influence of the oil and gas industry there. And to be honest, if I worked in oil and gas and I was responsible for the well-being of my family, I would be concerned about losing my job. So one of the things that's really important to us at the Climate Center, and one of our key principles that guides all of our work, is what we call a just transition. which means that people who are employed in the oil and gas industries and their families and their communities have to be supported to move and to make this transition to the new clean energy economy in a way that protects their interests and their families and their well-being. And if we don't do that, we're going to have a big fight on our hands. And that's where we are in California. So we have 10 years ago, we really were on the cutting edge. And since then, some of the unions that represent these workers have become very powerful in Sacramento. And it's understandable. So the question is, how can we work with these interests, both oil and gas companies, and even more so, in my opinion, the unions and the workers themselves, to ensure that they can make this transition, take care of their families, and have good, what they call high road jobs that allows them to continue living at the standard they're living right now. None of us would want that taken away from us, but we are talking about impacts that go way beyond each individual family. So that means big investments in transitioning people. And that may mean early retirement for some, paying extra for them to have training, to have new kinds of jobs. One area that some are looking into is how do we seal and close up the wells that they call orphan wells. There are tens of thousands of wells that are leaking methane in California. Methane, as many of you know, is a much more powerful short-term warming compound than carbon dioxide. The sooner we seal those wells, the sooner we can slow down that accelerated impact of climate change.
Just the fugitive methane alone would be a massive improvement if we could transition some of these jobs. I agree with you. The retraining aspect is one that is very appealing. There's so many transferable skills from that sector into things like gasifiers or pyrolysis or, thermochemical recycling, such as the company that's in our portfolio, Sonova. Which is, a true circular opportunity to transform mixed municipal waste into high value chemicals and power. And there are a lot of opportunities, but there are also a lot of barriers because of permitting and regulations that are dated and designed for a different context, really, not necessarily optimizing for what we can do on the climate front. What are your thoughts about that, Ellie? And then Lauren, how are you thinking about, that more personal element is the people who would be out of work or who are looking for jobs or looking to get involved in climate? I would love to hear your thoughts on how you're thinking about that and if there's ways that people can get engaged on that through your platform, Dashboard Earth.
Go ahead, Lauren. Why don't you go next, please?
Okay. So it's really exciting because, as you mentioned, there's such a need for retraining, and also even beyond the retraining of old coal and oil jobs, we're in this huge shift where many people are losing their jobs to automation, for example. And there's such a great opportunity to retrain, upskill into the green economy. So one of the initiatives we're working on is, for example, in tree care and tree maintenance. So we're working on pilots. Dashboard Earth right now is working on pilots with partners in Los Angeles because there's this problem with trees that have an average life cycle of 5 to 7 years because they die after being planted because they're not getting the proper care. And so that is, of course, an amazing opportunity for green jobs. And so there's fledgling programs that are creating those jobs for people in specific neighborhoods. And where Dashboard Earth is filling in the gaps is getting the word out and then also helping crowdsource tree care. So one of the things that we found is while there's often new policies or great programs that are happening and incentives that exist for people, such as the city of LA will give up to 7 free trees to any resident in order to address many of our environmental problems. A lot of people don't know about that. A lot of these incentives and programs fall short of having time and money budgeted to get the word out to people, especially people in disadvantaged communities, which often are the communities that need incentives the most. So what we're doing is we're filling in those gaps. We're collaborating with different nonprofits and different utilities as well to create create these programs where people can actually sign up for a free tree, but then are taken through step by step how to care for that tree. And then there are leaders in the community who can get a good green job to then care for those trees, and it's all kept track of, and we all see the way that our community improves over time with a program like that. So that's one of the ways that we're looking at it. It's really like, how do we empower individuals with the actions that they can take to improve their lives and improve their neighborhoods, and where are the gaps where there's a green job waiting to be developed. And that has to be a coordinated effort between people, policy, and organizations. So that's what we're endeavoring to do.
Well, we can't talk about trees without me weighing in as well. So last January, so just a little while ago, the Tree Pledge partnered with Radical Resilience Lab and the County of LA Parks and Recreation Department to create a program called Good Shade LA. And we work with the LA Conservation Corps to identify people in the communities where these tree projects are taking place, to recruit new people into job training and placement programs similar to what you described. And for those folks who don't have a high school degree, they have a charter school where they can get their high school diploma as well. And so we rolled out Good Shade LA in January. We're expanding that to be good jobs and then eventually good food. And so it's triangulating the issues of food insecurity, lack of tree canopy, shade equity, as we call it, and then the creation of green jobs, and doing so in a hyper-local way. What we're really hoping to do is expand this program across the entirety of LA County, finding the areas where, using geomapping tools and things where we're looking at the concentration of respiratory burden, lack of tree canopy, and demographic and income factors, using all of those things to inform very precisely where trees will have the biggest impact, and then doing a multilingual outreach campaign to these communities to help them understand not just the importance of trees for their mental and physical health, but also some of these links between poor air quality and some of the respiratory illnesses and heightened vulnerability during COVID. So these are all interconnected issues. And, we know that climate change is a threat multiplier. And with COVID, what we're seeing is that there's just another level of risk burden that many of the communities in California that are exposed in these industrial areas and in areas where there's a lot of extractive industry. We know that these are not coincidence. We know that these are proven scientifically, and people don't necessarily have access to resources or education to really advocate for themselves and to take action. So Ellie, that comes right back to you again.
That's really great. It makes me think about the connection between climate mitigation, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and climate adaptation, which is how we adapt to and prepare for the impacts of climate change and become more resilient to them. And one part of our platform, Climate Safe California, is to ensure that we need to dramatically cut emissions, no question about it. And we can do it. During COVID, we saw what was possible. Globally, our emissions went down compared to 2019 by 7%. And many of the international scientists are recommending that to get to where we need to be to maintain a safe climate, we have to be cutting emissions every year by that amount, not just during a pandemic. And it's not only cutting emissions, however, it's also pulling carbon out of the atmosphere that we've already put out there that is creating these warming impacts. And one big way of doing that is sequestering carbon through nature-based solutions. So trees are one part of that. And we work with an organization called the Carbon Cycle Institute here in California, and they do a major program for carbon farming. And we'd like to expand that to carbon gardening. So there should not be any bare soil anywhere in the state. Part of a solution that they've suggested is that we have these along every freeway in California, and there are thousands of miles of freeway in California, that we actually plant plants that can sequester carbon. So you have these like barrier zones that are bare soil. Well, let's plant them. Let's plant them in urban areas. Let's be sure, even in rural areas and areas that are agricultural, that we are covering the soil. California right now, and actually Western North America, the Western United States, is in the beginning of what they call a mega drought. A mega drought is a multi-decade drought. And that actually is a normal pattern for California. It's just that the 20th century, when California went from maybe 2 million residents to 40 million residents, and we grew our economy, we probably had the wettest century on record in the past 1,200 years. And now we go back to a more normal pattern where we have decades in a row of drought. Normally it would be moderate. You put climate change on top of it and it's severe. So one of the issues we have to think about in everything that we do is, how do we hold more water? How do we maintain a system that, as we get less and less rainfall, when it does rain, we capture that water so that we can strengthen the soil and the vegetation and replenish groundwater? It's critical to life as we know it. You can't capture carbon if you don't have water. And you can't capture it naturally, I should say. And so a big part of our platform and the policies we're promoting are to significantly invest in California in scaled up nature-based sequestration on natural and working lands. And one area that's ripe for huge opportunity here is in the agricultural sector, where you have a lot of disturbed soils and where some very simple things like application of compost that Lauren is making sure is made, that you can apply that, you put that on, and you can significantly increase in a very short period of time the ability of the soil microbes to sequester carbon.
I was hoping you were going to bring up compost, because it was so exciting to see CalRecycle acknowledging the role of compost in revitalizing soil, and in particular in fire-charred lands, which we unfortunately have so many of now. And what's really fascinating to me is that the largest, let's see, how do I say this properly? The majority of food scraps going to landfills are coming from households. That's according to ReFed. So about 42% of all food scraps going to landfills come from households. 40% are coming from consumer-facing businesses. And then the smallest amount is actually coming from agricultural, post-harvest loss, where there can be efficiencies in agricultural practices. So this brings us back to consumer education. ReFed also said that consumer education campaigns were the most high impact way to combat food waste as a problem. So what's exciting is again getting the word out to people that if you eat food, which is like, I think everybody, hopefully, if you eat food, you can be a part of one of the most transformative, high impact climate solutions out there by simply not putting your food scraps in a garbage can, but composting them. But then, of course, we come to, well, we need to have systems and infrastructure that support this behavior. And so we can look at that from an industrial scale point of view. We can look at that from a policy point of view. And we can also look at that from a community decentralized point of view. And how can we support the organizations and the ability to have hyper-local, decentralized community composting systems. And so I always love to point to LA Compost, who does really great work there. And Farah Zero is working with LA Compost in order to empower them to have more spaces and access points for composting, because there is actually a pretty high awareness and demand for compost spaces in Los Angeles in particular. But they can only move so fast and get spaces to open up access points if they don't have the actual proof of data of how many people are participating and how much demand there is for these spaces. You get caught in this web of, needing to apply for a permit to have a processing location at Griffith Park with Parks and Recreation. And it's like, if we actually can show that there's demand for these things, the will of the people in numbers, then we expedite these processes. And so that's also like the theory of change with Dashboard Earth is like, if you can show that you have, this many hundreds of thousands of people who are participating in these actions in these neighborhoods, and we're able to show people the impact of their actions, like you start a movement. And we have to be building systems and leveraging technology to build these movements and to do this data storytelling in a way that's really compelling and inspires action. But composting is just the best, as is tree planting. So I'm glad that we got to kind of touch on those two little areas.
Well, I love to nerd out on soil, so of course I have to weigh in too. I don't know about you, but as women climate warriors, sometimes, the daunting challenge of trying to turn this massive economic ship around, it's very frustrating. And so I take a lot of my righteous fury out by gardening. I love gardening, and I've been gardening for years. And first of all, anybody who has a yard can rethink what a plot of land means, right? And in a lot of places in California, the soil is just awful. It's been treated with any number of pesticides, and I have been in the process of restoring my soil and have been using some really cool compost products like robust compost and fungal infused biochar that I got from Simsoil, and I've been turning my backyard into one plot is a massive composting, like industrial scale, probably too big for household. And the other is a land that I'm basically reclaiming and turning into, what I hope is a hyper effective soil carbon capture opportunity. So I'm using that land to maximize soil carbon and then plant crops and grow my food, because why not? We're in a pandemic. And so I don't know about you guys, but how do you deal with this constant onslaught of, the challenges, both the reality of just, daily life, trying to get through the work that we do, but also the many hurdles that we have to overcome in our work, from everything from, climate deniers who are intentionally ignorant and otherwise, all the way to, just the collective action that's needed on the scale that's required and the time horizon that is urgent. How do you find your piece in all of this?
Well, for me, I would say I was born with the happy gene.
Oh, Ellie,
I know I'm very lucky. And so I am a born optimist. And but it's not just being born that way. It's that I've seen change happen in a positive way. But I'm not turning a blind eye to the realities that we face. There are huge challenges. There's no question. And somehow I enjoy reading about the latest science every single day, all the policy. On my weekends, part of what I do is spend time reading the news. And it's, for me, fulfilling because it lights my fire. It gets me going to want to make a difference even more. I have 2 teenagers who I care about dearly, and I think a lot about the future and the world that they'll grow up in. I mean, I think during my lifetime, how we went from basically, 310 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide equivalents in the atmosphere, to where we are today, around 415. That's my lifetime. And I think, wow, how do I ensure that by the time my kids are my age, that they can have some semblance of that safe climate to live in and to be nourished in and to be creative in and to live life fully in, not just in fear or in a situation where they're facing horrible weather events and climate impacts on a daily basis. So it's personal, it's communal. I do feel that we each have responsibility for our communities and the world. And that's part of education also, and part of family values. My version of family values is that we keep teaching that. So a bottom line is that I've been part of campaigns nationally and here in California where we made a difference. And that inspires me to work even harder to realize that in the realm of climate policy.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So inspiring.
I'm going to piggyback off of that. I think part of my fuel also comes from having been a part of campaigns that make a difference, seeing that when you do come together with a team, you can make amazing things happen, or even just the initiative of, I've had ideas and I'll just go out there and start prototyping them and just kind of learning by doing, and the iterative process of design thinking. And I love to nerd out on that. And it's like, I guess the more that you put yourself out there and attempt things and see that even if what you didn't expect to happen happened, something did, you were able to push the envelope in some way and meet people, meet the helpers. I love that. I think it originates from Mr. Rogers. Maybe that was just hearsay, but supposedly Mr. Rogers would say, like, look for the helpers when there's a crisis. And I just think that is so important to remember, because we can get so caught up in the deniers, the instigators, and endless et ceteras, the dim projections. But if we look for the helpers and we participate, and if we invite ourselves to imagine a better future, and we start telling those stories and let ourselves relish in those stories, then not only I find that cleansing for myself, but I find that to be something that invites people towards it. We have to use the language of joy and excitement when we talk about a better climate future, like good green jobs and healthy neighborhoods. And aren't trees amazing? Not only are they beautiful, but you can climb them, and they clean your water, and they clean your air, and they revitalize the soil, and they lower your energy bills, and they increase your property value. And it's like, hey, this is a party. It's amazing. Come on in. And so I just try to stay in that zone and surround myself with people who can bring me back into that zone when I get down, because I do. And I get stressed out, executor mode. We women, we do a million things. We're holding so much information. We are protectors of life, growers of life. It is in our DNA, whether or not somebody wants to, have an actual child. We are able to think in ecosystem and in cycles. It's just part of the laws of nature, right? And I think having a supportive community is key, and keeping staying in tune with the cyclical nature of things has always been super helpful for me personally. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I see that we have some questions coming in, and my apologies if I don't pronounce your name properly. D.A. Berjali, I'm not sure if that's correct. So there are a few questions in here about soil and municipalities and compost. So Lauren, can you answer the question, don't municipalities compost separated household waste here in California?
Guess what? A lot of the time they don't. Unfortunately, our systems of waste management, except for some of the innovations that Full Cycle is supporting, a lot of our waste management systems are pretty archaic. And, the state of California has goals for waste reduction, but it turns out that it's less expensive to pay the fines for not meeting those goals than it is to go through the 5 years of permitting and multi-millions of dollars of building the new industrial facilities that would actually process food waste into compost. And while these things are working themselves out, they kind of got pushed down the line for many years because of that. And so we end up in a situation where food goes in the garbage, and a lot of people have no idea that shouldn't be so. A lot of people don't realize that food in landfills creates 25% of the methane emissions in the United States. And so we're left with this interesting problem where we need the policies to support the change. And when they do, sometimes the actual businesses or haulers of waste have a hard time building out the infrastructure needed, and then people just don't know. But there are some places, like for example in San Francisco, where there is municipal curbside composting, and there's facilities. There are young programs or inchoate programs in places like the city of New York, where, and also in Los Angeles, where there's pilots that are happening, where he's sort of figuring out how to change the system in real time. But it's taken a while. And so when I speak to policymakers and folks in the waste industry, often what we talk about is, instead of only approaching it from a centralized perspective or a municipal perspective, can we also supplement with hyperlocal and decentralized systems? Because there's lots of co-benefits that go alongside that. If we make green spaces in community, and there's more urban gardens and places for people to come together and build community, build resilience, learn about gardening, have their own urban farms and gardens themselves, and that's also a point of compost or food scrap drop-off and compost creation, then you're bringing all of these wonderful things together. And that's taking some of the burden, which has an expense, off of only the city needing to deploy a curbside composting solution like today, because it gets stuck in the red tape and it takes time. And so it will happen eventually. But while we're waiting, it'd be great if we also had those community-based, hyperlocal, decentralized systems. And we can be more resilient by having hyperlocal, decentralized systems as well. So lucky you in the Netherlands. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And then Ellie, you had talked about the freeway barriers and places that are just basically these empty dirt patches that are all over California. The question here is, are people allowed to plant in these walkways and in these areas that are on the verge between different structures? I mean, when we think about California, it's hard not to think about the concrete jungle that is LA, right? And all the places where it's just empty without any green infrastructure. Ellie, what are things that people can do to help restore and green some of these spaces within the law? And then what are some of the things that we can do, to help drive policy?
Great questions. Thank you. So first, yes, I do not recommend trying to plant plants or put compost on those areas along the side of the freeway. It would be incredibly dangerous, and it probably is illegal to be standing on the side unless your car is broken in. So do not do that. But you can support policy to make that happen. I do think that they're starting with our own neighborhoods along the lines of what Lauren just described, working hyper locally in our neighborhoods, in our own backyards. As Rachel described, we can start transitioning our own environment to something that is sequestering carbon, that's vibrant, that's sustaining biodiversity. Just planting a few different native plants in your yard, you'll see that you'll get new butterflies and birds coming to visit. We've seen that in our yard here. And
I see that a lot.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. And so there are lots of things you can do. So one of the things to think about are plants, if you're planting, are plants that are native or are plants that are long rooted, because those long roots break up the soil. So when it does rain, it allows water to go a lot deeper, which means then you can actually have these ecological and biological processes that sequester more carbon and hold it longer deep in the soil.
What's an example of long rooted?
Annual plants versus perennials. You want perennials that come back year after year, and they build that root mass. So you can see some incredible pictures of these perennial grasses, for example, that have root systems that could be 8 feet or 10 feet deep in places where they've really managed the soil well. And whereas annual grasses that reproduce just by dropping seed and then start all over again, they're not holding nearly as much carbon. Unfortunately, in California, we have a lot of invasive grasses here. We have a lot of natural grassland, or a rancher would call it rangeland, where cattle can graze. And those grasslands are really full of European grasses now that were brought over with settlers over the last few hundred years. And it's dominated by those, but they're not adapted to the drought environment that we have here in California. So we're looking for plants that are either native or have qualities that help be more resilient to climate impacts like drought and fire as well. From a policy perspective, we need to be speaking up about this nature side of the solutions to climate change a lot more. For example, today there are a handful of new pieces of legislation being introduced in the state legislature just to establish goals for sequestration on natural and working lands. Here we are at the cutting edge, supposedly, of climate policy in California. We do not have formal state goals for sequestration. So we have some leaders in the state legislature that are starting to ask for that. And so we need to demand at the local level and all the way up to all of our electeds that we incorporate nature-based solutions much more as a part of our climate solutions toolbox. Mm-hmm. Again, we still need dramatic cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. We need to do everything simultaneously to get to the kind of climate safe future that we want to get to.
Mm-hmm. Ellie, let's just give people a sense of what we mean by, soil being a great multiplier of drawdown opportunities. Like what's the ratio?
Oh, okay. So if you apply compost, just a 1/4 inch of compost, there are studies that have been done with Marin Carbon Project and other organizations showing that just a 1/4 inch application of compost on the soil can increase the amount of carbon sequestered in the next year and in the next 5 years, 5 to even 10 times over, which is quite dramatic. And so we need to be sure that we don't leave soil bare, that we put compost on top, that even any kind of covering on top is better than nothing, but compost is much better. As Lauren described, when we start doing that, not only are we cutting down emissions in landfill, but we're actually replenishing the earth with nutrients and allowing it to thrive. So that's one part of the answer there.
Yes.
So, go ahead, Lauren.
It's also exciting because not only does it sequester more carbon, but that soil, once you apply compost, think of it like a vitamin. It improves the soil structure, which means that when it rains, the soil actually absorbs and holds the water. So that makes that land more drought, fire, and flood resilient. That's like part of how we have a healthy water table, right? Healthy soil absorbs and holds water, holds it for the plants that it can give life to. Healthy soil absorbs and holds nutrients and gives that to the plants. And then when soil has plants, those plants draw carbon down into the ground where it belongs. And it also cools the temperature of the area, which is something we all need, especially like there's so many areas in LA that are just like so hot. We can cool the city. LA has a goal of cooling the city by 7 degrees. And part of that effort is healing the soil and planting more trees for those reasons. And so when we're talking about the compounding impacts of regenerating soil, it's just so incredible what having healthy soil does across the board. So I just wanted to add those things in there because I just think it's amazing.
No, that's great. Might I add that our policy goal in California, as I said in the very beginning, is to get to net negative emissions, where we are drawing down more emissions than we are emitting by 2030 and securing resilient communities. So what does that really mean? In California right now, our emissions are something like 425 million metric tons a year. It's still a huge amount of emissions here and globally. We know it's happening all over the world. So we want to cut it down to under 100 million metric tons, which basically is an 80% reduction from where we are right now. And we want to match that with increasing the ability of soil and vegetation across the state at scale. We're talking about 25 million acres, or 1/4 of the state of California, that will increase its sequestration abilities by managing it better. Compost application in some places, habitat restoration, especially along riparian stream corridors where, like in the Central Valley, we've lost 95% of that vegetation. Many other practices, there's something like 35 to 40 practices that are recognized that can help us sequester more carbon, hold more water, sustain biodiversity, secure food for people, and secure jobs and the health of our communities.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So I see Carrie Norton has joined us, and she has two really wonderful questions. So for people like me who are trying to use whatever land we have available to sequester carbon, what kinds of tools or devices are available to measure that sequestration, or how much living and biological matter that it contains?
That's a good question. I don't think they're popularly available. So there is through the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is a federal agency in the United States as part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It was originally formed in the 1930s as the Soil Conservation Service in response to what was happening in Oklahoma and Kansas, the Dust Bowl days, where the soil was drying out completely. And today they still work on soil health, really, as a foundational effort of their work. And they have some tools that allow you to measure fairly simply, but it usually requires a scientist to be part of it. So that actually I think is a great point, because I think it's a limitation. We should have ways to measure this, standard ways that are simple, that allow the greatest accessibility to it, so we can all be measuring it. I have a dream where in every neighborhood we would have a community climate leader, like a neighborhood sustainability leader, and you would work on a number of different issues. Car sharing. We don't all need to have a car for every single person in our household. We need to reduce the number of cars. Even as they go electric, we need to have fewer people using cars. We need to have more mass transit. We need to share cars in our neighborhood. We also need to share our gardens in our neighborhoods, and share compost application in our neighborhoods, and share measures of success, which means it would be incredible to be able to measure how much carbon we're really sequestering. In some ways, we can use indicators of that. And so at Point Blue, my former organization, we would use birds as indicators of soil health.
Well, so then I'll tell you, my soil is healthy because I've got a gaggle of birds these days. And
how many bugs, birds, worms? Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Well, I've got the worms. Don't worry about that.
As Lauren said, if we aren't measuring it, we don't really know what we're doing. So we do have to find easier ways for everybody to be able to measure this. And I think that is a great opportunity for someone to come up with a way to do that that's simple, but also accurate enough so that it's real. We need to know that we're really making progress in reducing emissions.
Lauren, seems like something that could be really relevant for you.
Totally. So I'm excited hearing you speak, Ellie, and also Rachel. I mean, this is very much the ethos that we're like the point from which we're thinking for Dashboard Earth, like having climate leaders in neighborhoods, being able to see the progress, being able to see the health of the neighborhood today and what needs to happen to bring it to resilience and sustainability tomorrow, and then see our progress there. It's like, imagine, if you were checking the stock market or like Coinbase crypto, you kind of see the indicators, right? Based on what people are doing, what activity is happening. And that's part of the vision. And then having leaders in neighborhoods because not everybody is going to have bandwidth or interest of being a leader, but there's always somebody, right? And so we have to equip those people with the tools and make it really contagious. And I agree. I mean, the tools for measuring the health of our soil exist, but they haven't mainstreamed or democratized in such a way. And I think, compost is pretty sexy these days. Like, it's cool to actually even just see, like, in the comments, like, people are interested in soil and in composting. So we're seeing this groundswell, which is really exciting. And I think the more that we invest in the development of compost spaces and technology and infrastructure, the better off we'll be. I know personally that there's been great headway in developing systems that are able to monitor the health of a pile at a community level. so that you can see how your compost pile is doing, because you can just kind of get a sense of the oxygen level, the emissions, the moisture level, etc., and the ratio of carbon to nitrogen. And if you can have a sensor or multiple sensors that are giving you a sense of that, then it opens up this whole world of being able to certify that that compost is safe because it's been above a certain temperature for a period of time. And I think once we can get those types of little sensors into the hands of whoever want them at a very low price point, then an app like Dashboard Earth could crowdsource soil health.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's really exciting, because then
it sounds really exciting, Lauren.
and we're starting to do that with trees. There's a pilot in LA that's happening with sensors that are being put on trees at the soil, like the root area of trees, to get a sense of whether they're being cared for, so that we can get a sense of whether they need water or mulch, etc. So the next step is just, taking it just a little bit further so that we can monitor the sequestration amount. But I think that there's isn't there a lot of variance in these studies so far? Like, don't we have a ways to go in being able to kind of standardize the soil, the carbon sequestration of soil?
There is a lot of variation. I am seeing some pretty cool technology in my role as an investor that's trying to go beyond, taking samples and having to have an army of scientists analyzing the samples. And I'm not sure yet whether any of these would be what I call technology ready, but there's a lot of innovation happening. And as with most things technology related, once you get to a certain level of scale, usually those costs do come down significantly. Sorry, Ellie, I think I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was just thinking that there are standard ways to measure what they call soil organic matter, which is one indicator of the health of the soil and the ability to sequester. And like I said, it's being used nationally. There are several ways to measure with the Natural Resources Conservation Service right now. But we need to find simpler ways to do it that's equivalent and make it available at scale.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I think we had one more question. Yes, from Carrie Norton. I so appreciate your collective sense of urgency. I share it, and I can't believe how few people in positions of power aren't in tune to our 8-year window for action. How do we reconcile this dissonance? So I'll start this question off just because I'm deep in the book, the new book from Michael Mann, The New Climate War. And as we know, it's not an accident. There's been decades-long campaign for deflection and distraction to make people think that it's all about individual action and to address and to not address systemic change, which is what, Ellie, of course, that's what you're working on. And so we know that there's a lot of funding that's been channeled into misinformation campaigns and deflecting the blame from the fossil fuel industry and trying to hone in on a particular issue to rally support and engagement in order to prevent people from holding large corporations accountable for their emissions and, of course, for their bad behavior around this. So, Ellie, first of all, I mean, you know the timeline, you know it's urgent. You're working in one of the most populous and powerful states that can also act as a leader to the rest of the country if we choose to. So how do you reconcile this dissonance, and what are your suggestions here?
Well, thank you so much. It's a great question, but I first want to clarify something, that it's not that we have 8 years left to make a difference. I want to be really clear. It's not like on January 1st, 2030, we fall off a cliff. One could argue that we already are falling off a cliff right now, and that we continue to fall over the decades ahead. The more we do now, the better we all are off, right? But we always can make a difference. Beyond 2030, there'll be plenty of work that we will still have to do. No question about it. I just want to be really clear.
And I just think Carrie's responding to the fact that the next 10 years, the next 8 to 10 years are the most critical for climate action today in order to have outsized effects.
It's true. And the sooner we act big, the more we save in terms of lives and dollars, and the more we can become economically vibrant again sooner. Let's think about it this way. In California, the 2018 fires that destroyed the town of Paradise cost, a study came out showing that it cost $150 billion. 30% of that roughly was the actual on-the-ground cost of the footprint, where the footprint of the fire was. Another 30% health impacts on people far away. And the rest of it really on economic supply chain impacts way beyond the borders of California. So these events that are becoming more and more common, not just here, the ice event in Texas, and it's happening all over the world, flood events, extreme heat, they are incredibly costly. For us here in California, that was 2/3 of our annual state budget for one major fire event. I mean, these are incredibly costly, but we know numerous studies have shown that we invest today big, we will save huge amounts of money down the road. It will just cost us more and more the longer we go, again, in terms of lives and dollars and the economic and health of our communities. And so we need to focus on, for me, and what we do at the Climate Center is we're focusing on state policy, which again, we see as this critical unlock for everything else. And so we need, first of all, we need leaders who will speak out. And isn't it interesting as we celebrate International Women's Month, which really is the year, because women are always leading on environmental and climate issues. And we do have some wonderful men who are leading as well. I do want to acknowledge. But Senator Fran Pavley, a woman, and as state assembly member and senator, was a leader in getting our really cutting edge climate policies in place in California. I think we need more women leaders speaking out on climate change. We need more of our elected leaders demanding change and not kowtowing to the oil and gas interests, which really are in their death throes right now. And they're pushing back hard. We need to push back harder. And we can do that at the ballot box. We can do it in our own communities. We need to take back our local governments and make sure that at every level we are demanding that our elected officials address climate change boldly and in a timely manner. So our Climate Safe California campaign, saying that we will get to net negative emissions by 2030, it is totally possible to do that. It only requires political will. And so we think of political will and policymaking as a sailboat, and they go nowhere without wind. And who is the wind? We can't allow the wind to be the oil and gas industry. We can't allow it to be the unions who represent the workers, even though they have done some great things for their workers. It has to be based on the broader good for the life of people and nature on our planet, to sustain us for our future. And so for me, we are the wind in the sails, and we have to make sure that we are the most powerful, which means every one of us has to actively participate in our democracy at all levels. And that's how we can make this change. I mean, the future really is in our hands. And with all the projections, as negative as they are, we can make it completely different because this technology and the solutions exist today. It truly is a matter of political will.
Wonderful. Lauren.
Preach, Ellie. Political will and the will of the people. I'm glad you brought democracy into it, because that's so on point. And we have to protect this precious thing that is democracy. And we have to find ways to summon the will of people so that we can expedite policy and make it happen, to your point. And, I wanted to comment also on this, the need for a change in the way we're accounting for things, because part of what got us into this mess is not accounting for, like literally keeping track of the negative externalities of businesses and services, the cost on the planet, the cost on people elsewhere. There's this quote from Vandana Shiva, who was like, you buy a $7 H&M shirt, but it doesn't cost $7. That's not the true cost. There's a cost on the girl in Bangladesh who made it, at child labor at a horrible exploitative rate. And there's a cost on the planet. And so we have to build systems that actually account for the true cost of things. And then we have to not overwhelm people with all of this information, which is it's terrifying when people kind of wake up to the reality of things. So we have to present people with actionable insights, not just like information, but like, here's what you literally can do. And then that summons the will of the people, which then fuels policy and gives it longevity. And again, also having like the data insights of how much people are participating and how much cost savings that's creating, like to use the example of decentralized compost spaces in a place like LA or New York City, you can run the numbers of how much money that saves the city of LA in waste collection and tipping fees. Numbers speak, data speaks. You can show how many people are participating, how much money it's saving, how much it's improving our ecosystem. And that's how you bake in longevity of these policies. And so, I think we agree. It's like this hybrid approach of the political will of the people, but we have to be doing this in a coordinated effort and make it understandable and not overwhelming, right?
I also love the phrase, "We are the wind." I sail. I've been sailing since 2006, mainly in the Bay Area, and the wind is real there. And it actually gives me even more appreciation for nature and its bounty. How about turning to, our final question now around, just zooming out a little bit. If there's one final call to action that you'd want to make to not just this audience, but to the world, like just a message that you want to convey, what are some of the things that come to your mind as either the actions they can take now or a way to reframe and think about the problem differently, maybe an insight you'd want to share? And I'll start just to kick it off. There's a belief often that to be an impact investor, you have to accept concessionary returns. There's a belief that in order to do good, you have to start a nonprofit. And I think that if we rethink the problem and we consider that addressing the climate challenge in a meaningful way is one of the greatest opportunities for an investor, for an entrepreneur, for an inventor of our lifetime. And because of that opportunity, you would eventually be serving a large global market, a growing demand for such solutions, which to me presents a business opportunity. So as an investor, you can have very attractive returns while maximizing your net carbon impact, and really looking at how you can channel whatever resources you have, whether you are an individual investor, whether you are an entrepreneur, whatever it is that you can bring to the table. You don't have to relegate yourself to the nonprofit sector, and you don't have to think about it, as a small project. You can really be bold and ambitious and think about this as one of the greatest business opportunities that presents itself to a generation.
That's great.
Yeah.
I agree
too.
And I would say, for me, the biggest thing is to set bold goals. You touched on it, Rachel. Don't hold back. We have to think big. In some ways, this moment is an opportunity to be more creative than ever before. With the technology and know-how and interconnectedness of all of us on this planet, we can do more faster than we ever have. We have to be thoughtful about it. Again, we have the know-how and the technology to do the right things, but let's do it, and let's do it big. We know that bold goals work. When we set bold goals, we can make big things happen. That's what we need right now. And I encourage whoever is listening and for all of us to be actively engaged in making that new vision happen. And it's true. We need business. We need nonprofits. We need everybody to be part of this.
Yep. I guess I'll say I co-sign everything you've said, both of you. I would encourage everyone to pay attention to the stories that you're internalizing, and to surround yourself with the positive stories of solutions that are happening in big and small ways. The small acts of entrepreneurship, the big acts of entrepreneurship and green investment, and to remind yourself that something like waste does not exist in nature. In nature, everything is food for life and fuel for the next cycle of life. waste is something that humans invented, and we can fix it. You know, the power of humans created some of our problems, and the power of humans can solve the problems that we created. And so I always remind myself of that. And last but not least, of course, if you eat food, then you can be a part of the biggest climate solution around. Compost.
I really love this model of a distributed network of compost access points, community gardens. Maybe we get some soil measurement tools in there somewhere. You know, power of the people element to that.
Yes.
And, you know, keep it up, Lauren. I wish you great success in your ability to aggregate all of the interests and desires for action among people here and, of course, globally.
Thank you. Look out for coming out this summer, and it'll be a place for you to find all your compost resources and actions, as well as tree planting, as well as other incentives for like switching to solar energy savings, like planting wildlife corridors and pollinator hotspots. I mean, it's like a library of climate action and knowledge and resources that are relevant for you. So thanks for your wishes and support. And it's been amazing to be on this panel. I'm humbled to be amongst you, incredible women.
So Lauren, when is it that we're supposed to be looking for the app? And is it in the Apple's App Store, or is it in Android? Or
we're in beta right now. We're kind of in stealth mode beta because we are running pilots with partner organizations in LA, and kind of, you know, working through how we can both best support delivering opportunities to people to participate in climate actions and collective climate actions, so that we're not just putting the impetus on like, oh, it's your job and responsibility, because as we've acknowledged here, it's really not. But then also supporting organizations who are, you know, the bridge and the lifeblood of climate resilience. So we're in stealth mode. We're doing our partner pilots in Los Angeles, and we'll be launching in the summer in July. So that's when you can look out for us. But if you were to go to the website, you can sign up for the wait list and everything. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And speaking of websites, I'll just add to invite anybody to endorse Climate Safe California from wherever you are in the whole world. You can go to climatesafeca.org.
We've endorsed.
You're welcome. Your endorsement. Yay! Thank you so much. And there's also a whole list of climate actions that you can take as individuals. And Lauren, I'd like to add a connection to your website for folks to be able to more easily find
Yes,
that.
we should absolutely talk, because Dashboard Earth is made to support organizations like yours and to bring your work
Excellent.
to people. So that's what it's about. It's really great to meet you.
Likewise.
Ellie,
Thank you, Rachel, for including
in
me as
the
well.
chat so people can see it. The URL website.
Yep.
That would be great for both of you. And what a delight to be with all of you today. This has been recorded, so it will be made available to more folks who weren't able to tune in. And thank you to everyone who asked questions. I'm sure Lauren and Ellie would be happy to follow up later, so you can check us out maybe on LinkedIn or anywhere that you want to be found. It's such a joy to talk to you. You know, as women leaders in the climate movement, we often are, you know, heads down doing the work, and we're not always, you know, the people who are seen first. And so really it's about amplifying our voices as part of this larger movement, which of course is the theme of this summit. So amplifying the voices of women who are in the climate movement, and really recognizing that our work is absolutely pivotal for not just the future sustainability and survivability of our species on the planet, but also the beauty and the health of the planet itself. And so thank you for the work that you do. Happy Women's History Month, happy International Women's Month, and all the things. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you so much. Be well and keep up the great work.
Thank you. You too.
You too.
Bye.